I honestly believe that Dan Campbell is in the running and should be the NFL's coach of the year. It's been a long time since the Lions have had a coach that has done what he's been able to do, that has the energy that he does, that is beloved by his players, the staff, the organization, and most notably the fans. In the last 35 years, you're probably going to ask, Will, why are you going back 35 years? Well, I'm going back 35 years to 1988, to the beginning of the Wayne Fontes era, because he was the last coach that was the AP Coach of the Year in 1991, the Pro Football Weekly Coach of the Year in 1991, and the UPI NFC Coach of the Year in 1991. And I believe Dan Campbell is going to do it in 2023. Why is it important? What are the stats that really stand out to us as fans? Well, I can tell you this. Over 35 years, the Lions have had 9 different head coaches lead this team onto the field. But not just 9 coaches. They've also had 4 temporary coaches lead this team onto the field. And only 4 coaches have lasted more than 3 seasons. Wayne Fontes, 1988 to 1996, 9 seasons. Bobby Ross, 1997 to 2000, 3.5 seasons. Gary Moeller filled in for 11 games that last year. Marty Morningwig, 2 seasons. Steve Mariucci, 2 seasons and 11 games. Dick Duran filled in the final 5. Rod Marinelli, 3 seasons exactly. We thought we had something going with Schwartz. But Jim Schwartz, he lasted 5 complete seasons. And although he had some success, he just quite couldn't put it all together with, what we thought was a loaded team. Then Jim Caldwell, who probably should have never been fired. He lasted 4 seasons. And then there was the Matt Patricia era. And he lasted 2 seasons and 10 games. Darrell Bevell filled in for 5, and in the final game, Robert Prince filled in for 1. Now you have Dan Campbell, who's sitting at 44 games coached for the Detroit Lions, who is now only 3 games away from getting the Detroit Lions to 500. And I believe that he's going to do this. But today's video is not only the start of a milestone, but it's also speaking to some milestones that matter. Dan Campbell is officially past Matt Patricia in the amount of time that he spent in Detroit scuttling our team. And that's important to us because this coaching carousel and swinging door has got to stop. And that buck stops with Dan Campbell, who's leading this team to what many fans are talking into a dynasty era for Motown football. I'm a believer. I see it happening. And no, I don't believe that Dan Campbell wants to go anywhere else to his alma mater or anything else. I feel like that stuff is pumped out there just to kind of take the attention away from Dan Campbell, get into his head a little bit, right? It's not going to happen. Dan Campbell is so focused on doing what he set out to do. And when he wins the Super Bowl in Detroit, maybe at some point he might go back to his alma mater. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. Maybe it's a dream of his, to one day coach his alma mater. But again, he's got a job to do in Detroit that he's here to finish. He's started and he's going to finish. He's not a man that starts something that doesn't finish. When he puts his mind to something, he does it. When he tells us he's going to do something, he follows through. I expect Dan Campbell to bring the Lombardi Trophy to Detroit. Not to get too far off topic, I really wanted to focus in on Dan Campbell's accomplishments so far. And like I said, he would have been fired if this was the past regime. He would not have gotten out of 2022. But they stuck by the plan. And Brad Holmes speaks to the plan consistently year in and year out. When they hired Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, and they sat down with Chris Spielman and Sheila Hamp and the rest of that team, I can only imagine the plan that they put together. And I remember Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes kind of speaking to this at one point over the last year or so, that they scribbled a plan on a piece of paper, and they still have it. And that's the plan they're sticking to. Most people would think you would sit down, you would probably properly write out a business plan, and you bring in your writers and your analysts and your financial team and everybody else, and you really sit down and go through it. No, not this set of guys and ladies. They had a true brainstorm of what they wanted to do and how they were going to get there, and they're sticking to it. But it's incredible to finally be a Lions fan where we're not wondering, well, who's going to be our coach next year? Or, man, who are we going to get in the top 5 in the draft in 2024? Look, I'm still excited about the draft. I may do some videos about the draft early. And that's only because now we're on the other side of it. It's who can we add to this team late in the first round that's going to get us over the hump and get us into the next, level of competition within the NFL that's really going to help make us relevant for years to come. Dan Campbell's relevant. Dan Campbell's doing things that we didn't expect. Nobody expected it. Remember, he was the meathead. He was the biting kneecaps guy. The guy that didn't have words at a press conference and totally went off on a tangent about, guts and glory and blood and kneecaps and body parts and really threw everybody off. But you know what? That's exactly what we needed. Something different. That's Dan Campbell. He's different. He does it his own way. And he's doing it the right way because it's his way. But he's not shy of accepting responsibility. He's not shy of accepting criticism. He's not going to push away intelligence and smart people. He's going to bring them in and get them around him in this team and this staff to elevate. He's not afraid to bring in a highly competitive coach and add him to his team. He would rather have his replacement on the team than not. And I think that it really speaks volumes to the type of character that Dan Campbell exudes. So 44 games. Dan Campbell's on his way. He's 20-23. And by week 15, week 14, Dan Campbell can get this club to 500 and finish above 500 as a coach, not just as a team, but as a coach for the first time since Jim Caldwell, right? Doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but he was let go in 2017. And it matters because, like I said, there's only been 4 coaches since 1988 that have lasted more than 3 seasons. And beyond that, if you don't count the temporary coaches, which I wouldn't because they were temporary, less than a season, Jim Caldwell was the last coach to finish above 500 that coached for more than a season. But I want to show you something else too. What Dan Campbell has done with this gut job and total rebuild from the mud up, as I like to say, not the studs, the mud. 85% of the 53-man roster has been changed since the 2020 roster. So that means entering 2021, when Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes started, they have changed out 85% of the 50-man roster. Now, the overall roster, right, the starting roster, only 2 starters remain. Taylor Decker and Jonah Jackson are the only 2 starters. I'm sorry, Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson, and Frank Ragnow are the only 3 starters that remain on this team. That's an incredible feat when you think about it. Roughly 10% of his starting players remain from when he inherited the team from the prior year roster. I don't think people take that into account at just how much Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes have had to go through, and how much transition they've had to go through. And look, that's not easy to start all new players. The bigger thing is how well they've drafted, and how those players are getting, instant success on the field as starters or very high quality backups. So I wanted to add this little bit of information. And since that 2020 roster, these are the players that remain on the overall roster, not just the starters, not just the 53 man, but the overall roster. Taylor Decker, Frank Ragnow, Jonah Jackson, Romeo Okwara, Jack Fox, Jason Kabinda, Will Harris, and Tracy Walker. And I'm willing to bet by next season, Jason Kabinda and Will Harris will no longer be around. Romeo Okwara probably will no longer be around. Jonah Jackson is the only one in that list that I have questionable on whether they're going to return or not, or get franchise tagged. I just think that he's going to cost too much money. But again, that's not what this video is about. But those are the players. Those 8 players that remain from the overall roster of 2020 to 2023 to 2024. It's an incredible feat of where Dan Campbell is. All right, back to the video. What do you think about Dan Campbell and his accomplishments? How long do you think Dan Campbell's going to be around? I hate to put a timestamp on it, but at what point do you think Dan Campbell's going to bring a trophy to this city? The Lombardi Trophy. Is it going to be this year? I'm betting on next year. I'm not out on this year, but being realistic, I would say that a lot of things have to go right this year. And I'm not going to go into all the X's and O's and the defense and the offense issues that we have, but I think that they're half a season ahead of themselves. And I think, again, that speaks volumes to what Dan Campbell has been able to do with the type of players that he has. And, just now entering, what next year will be his 4th season and their 4th draft, which is another good point to bring up, because teams that give coaches time, you need at least 4 drafts to build your team organically. And if you think about it, let's say you get 7 picks a season, right? In the draft, you get all of them, which would be rare because that typically doesn't always happen. You've made trades or, you've done certain things where you're going to end up losing some picks here or there. But Brad Holmes has been pretty darn good about giving us a full slate, if not a few extras every season. But 4 times 7 is 28. If you were to hit on even 50% of your draft picks, which are typically your 1st, 2nd, and 3rd rounders, and maybe a 4th rounder here or there, well, that only leaves you with 14 starters, potentially, over 4 drafts. You're fielding half of a football team over 4 drafts. And if you do it right, that would be enough with free agency, and the trade deadline and the waiver wire and everything else to be able to build a team that can win a lot of games. But I really believe it takes 4 seasons to field your own team as a head coach, unless, and that's coming from a rebuild, unless you're not rebuilding and you start off with a pretty loaded team, where at least one side of the football is pretty darn good. The money's good, as far as cap dollars, the draft capital's good. Then it may only take you a couple of seasons. But that's never been the case in Detroit. We've always been behind the 8 ball. Matter of fact, when Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes took on this team, we were tens of millions of dollars, in the hole with dead cap. So I wanted to add a little bit more context to what I just said, talking about the tens of millions in dead cap. I don't think that really shines a bright enough light upon what Dan Campbell has done and what Brad Holmes has helped to put together. And it really speaks volumes to the financial team that this organization has put together. They brought in, as you know, Rod Wood, who is a financial genius, and his team and the staff that they have working on contracts and the rest of the, pertinent financials for the organization are doing an excellent job. But let's talk about 2020. So before Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes take over the reins, in 2020, the Lions organization had $29 million in dead cap. They had $35 million in injured reserves. So I mean, that's useless money, right? You can't use it. It's tied up for players that aren't playing or players that aren't on the team. They had 13 million in cap space. Okay, so not great. But in 2021, when they took the team over and they made all the cuts that they were going to make, and didn't bring back some of the players. Remember, they started cutting, and basically chopping out 85% of the roster from 2020 till now. In 2021, they had 67 million in dead cap. 51 million in injured reserve. Out of a maximum salary cap just south of 200 million, only 76.5 million of it was in active contracts on the field, playing on the roster. Cap space 1.1 million. So it more than doubled from the previous season in dead cap and injury reserve money. How are you going to field a team when you have zero money to work with? Not only did they bring it to the mud, but they had zero money to rebuild with. And they needed draft capital. That's why Stafford had to be moved. Now, I believe some of this dead cap money obviously was wrapped up in the Stafford trade. That's why the number ballooned a little bit. But it is what it is. And this is why I felt like 2024 was going to be the season. In 2021, this dead cap number calms down a little bit. And they start the season, about 35 million in dead cap, 20.5 million in injury reserve. So the number gets cut in half. So great job. 2023, they get even better. The dead cap drops to about 24.5, and the injury reserve is about 22.4 million. So they keep getting better. But in 2024, fellas, ladies, gentlemen, whoever's watching, this is when the show begins. 2024. Not only will we have the most players signed to active contracts to start the season before the draft. Right now, I think that's 39 players. Don't quote me. It's been hovering between 39 and 40, which is about 10 or 11 more than we had the season before. And I don't know, 15 more than we had the season before that. But in 2024, our dead cap number is less than $1 million. Our injury reserve right now is nothing because we don't have anybody on injury reserve for next year. But we just don't know what that number is going to be. Our estimated cap space is going to start at about 60 million. And that's before the adjusted salary cap from the NFL takes place and what they're going to, allow all the teams to work with. 60 million, multiple draft picks, good draft capital, 1 million in dead cap. This is why I always felt like we were looking to 2024 to really have that bounce back year and really get aggressive in not only in free agency, but the trade deadline if we're ready to make a big push. And I'm going to stick to it. So, all right. I wanted to add some more context to it. So there it is. And I hope you guys are liking the video. We're going to go back to it just now. And Matt Patricia and Quinn really left us in a darker hole with some of those big, nasty contracts with players that didn't work out. It would have been one thing, if the Trey Flowers deals, and the Jamie Collins deals and things like that, if the players that they brought in from New England and wherever else were actually decent players and worked out for us, that's a different story. But they didn't even really get on the field much, after their first season because they didn't play well or they were injured. So you're left in a dark hole with dead cap, limited draft capital, and the player's not even on the field. That's just the tip of the iceberg that Dan Campbell has had to chip away, and Brad Holmes that they've had to chip away at, and to finally rebuild this team to something that, in my opinion, is about 3/4 of the way there. We're so close, but I'm definitely proud to say that this team's going in the right direction for the first time in a long time. And I'm glad to see that Sheila Hamp had the courage to address the media, the fans, and let us know that she was sticking to the plan and that she had full trust in Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes last season to continue the process. And now we're seeing why. She never wavered. She bought in. The players bought in. And now we're winning games that we used to lose. That's why Dan Campbell's going to stick around for a while. Look, there's going to be some ugly games. There's going to be some questionable calls. And I'm on both sides of that fence. You know, I'm critical when I'm critical, and I'm ecstatic when it works out. But you know what? I'm a realist. I'm a fan that speaks from the heart, but also from a place of reality. The media side is the realistic side, and then you've got the fan side that is a little less unrealistic at times because we've been waiting for so long. But look, we're doing it right. Dan Campbell's doing it right. He's meeting some milestones. He's officially again passed Matt Patricia for games coached as a Detroit Lions head coach, which is the first of many milestones. The second one is going to happen in week 14. The Lions win the next 3 games. Dan Campbell gets to 500, and he never looks back. That's all for today. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Go One Pride. Go Detroit Lions. We'll catch you next time. Take care.
Wants to throw it to Short. He caught it. He's going for down. Oh, yes. The big man dives down the 31-yard line. Oh, that is beautiful. Fields looking pressured. Hit from behind. Take it down. Aiden Hutchinson got him.
No respect.
So, you know, we look like we're ready. This is day one.
No respect.